My grandmother died on a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp, gray morning that feels like the world is already in mourning. She was 81 years old, sharp as a tack until her final week, and she went quietly in her sleep in the same farmhouse in rural Vermont where she had lived for over 50 years. Her name was Eleanor Marsh, Grandma Ellie to us, and if you had asked anyone in our family or anyone in the small town of Harwick where she was known and beloved, they would have told you the same thing. She was the most honest, most decent woman any of them had ever known. I would have agreed with every word of that. My name is Carrie, and I am, or I was, her eldest grandchild. I was 29 when she died, and I had been closer to her than perhaps anyone in the family. My parents divorced when I was 7. My dad drifted away, and my mom worked double shifts most of my childhood. Grandma Ellie was the one who braided my hair before school, who sat at every single one of my high school plays, who drove 4 hours through a snowstorm to be in the hospital waiting room when I had my appendix out at 23. She was my North Star. She was, in the truest sense, the person I wanted to be. So when she passed and we gathered at the farmhouse to begin the slow, heartbreaking process of going through her belongings, I volunteered for every task. I wanted to be close to her things. I wanted to fold her sweaters myself. I wanted to be the one who decided what got kept and what got donated. It felt like the last thing I could do for her, and I took it seriously. The farmhouse was old, built in the 1890s, added onto over the decades in that haphazard New England way, so that the floor plan made only partial sense. There were 2 staircases, a pantry that had been converted into a half-bathroom at some point, and a mudroom that connected to a section of the house we always just called the back. The back had a small sewing room, a room my Uncle Danny had slept in as a teenager, and at the end of a narrow hallway, a plain wooden door that I had never once given a second thought to in my entire life. I had always assumed it was a closet. It was on the 3rd day of clearing the house that I finally walked down that hallway with a box of linens in my arms, intending to check every door for storage space. I set the box down, reached for the handle, and found it locked. Not just stuck, locked. There was a keyhole below the handle, old-fashioned, the kind that takes a long skeleton key. I tried the handle a few more times. It didn't budge. I stood there for a moment, genuinely confused. I had been in this house hundreds of times in my life. I had played every corner of it as a child, had explored it with the particular obsession that children bring to old houses with creaky floors and hidden nooks. How had I never noticed this door was locked? I suppose the answer is simple. Children notice what adults draw their attention to, and no adult had ever drawn my attention here. I went to find my mom and my uncle. "Did you know about a locked room in the back hallway?" I asked, and the way they both looked at me, genuinely blank, told me everything. Neither of them had any idea. My Uncle Danny grew up in this house. He'd lived there until he was 18, and even he had no memory of that door ever being opened. We spent an hour looking for a key. We went through Grandma Ellie's kitchen junk drawer, her jewelry box, the little ceramic dish by the front door where she kept miscellaneous bits and pieces. We found nothing that matched. Eventually, my uncle went to his truck and retrieved a set of lockpicks. Don't ask. And after about 20 minutes of patient work, the tumblers gave, and the door swung open. The smell hit us first. Not rot, not mold, not anything alarming, just oldness, stillness, the particular smell of a room that has been sealed and left alone for a very long time. We stood in the doorway for a moment before any of us stepped inside. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet. There was a single window, but it had been boarded over from the inside with a sheet of plywood, so no natural light came in. My uncle found a lamp on a small table just inside the door and clicked it on, and we blinked in the dim yellow light, and we looked at what my grandmother had kept hidden from all of us for what would turn out to be 47 years. There was a crib, an old wooden crib, painted white, the paint chipped and yellowing with age. It sat in the corner of the room, and inside it, neatly folded as though placed there with deliberate care, was a small yellow blanket and a stuffed rabbit with a worn ear. Against one wall, there was a small dresser, and on top of the dresser, arranged in 2 careful rows, were photographs, maybe 15 or 20 of them, all showing the same child, a baby, then a toddler, then a small boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old at latest. In some photos he was alone, in several he was being held by a young woman who it took me a moment to recognize because she was so young, maybe 19 or 20, but whose face I knew as well as my own. My grandmother, Grandma Ellie, decades before I was born. I picked up one of the photographs. My hands were not entirely steady. In it, young Ellie was sitting in a hospital bed, clearly just given birth, hollow-eyed and exhausted, and luminous. She was holding an infant wrapped in a white blanket, and the expression on her face was one I had never seen on her before, something raw and enormous and private, the specific grief-love of someone who already knows they are losing something. There was a name embroidered on the corner of the yellow blanket in the crib. We could all read it clearly from where we stood. Thomas. My grandmother had a son named Thomas, a son who would have been born around 1958, roughly 11 years before my mother. A son that no one, not my mother, not my Uncle Danny, not a single living member of our family, had ever known about or been told about. My mother sat down on the floor of that small, sealed room and started to cry. We didn't speak much for the rest of that afternoon. We each walked around the room slowly, touching things carefully, reading things carefully. Alongside the photographs, there were a few documents in the dresser drawer, a birth certificate, which confirmed it, a boy named Thomas Raymond Marsh, born June 9, 1958, mother Eleanor Ruth Marsh. In the space for the father's name, it simply read, unknown. There was also a single letter, handwritten, in an envelope that had been resealed with tape, as though it had been opened and closed many times over the years. I was the one who opened it. The handwriting inside was my grandmother's. It was not addressed to anyone. It read more like a letter to herself, or perhaps to him. She wrote that she had been 17 when she became pregnant, that her parents, devout and frightened, had arranged everything without asking her, that in 1958, for a girl like her in a town like this, there had been no choice offered, only a decision made on her behalf. She had been sent to a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, where she had carried Thomas to term, and 4 days after he was born, he had been taken from her and placed for adoption. She wrote that she had spent the following decades searching for him, quietly, privately, in the way that was possible before the internet, which was to say, mostly failing. She had made contact once through a social worker in the mid-1980s and learned that he was alive and well and living in Oregon. She had written him a letter through the intermediary service. He had not written back. She had respected that. She had never tried again. But she had kept this room. She had kept his crib, his blanket, his rabbit. She had gathered every photograph the home had given her. Apparently they did that, gave the mothers photographs, a practice that felt almost crueler than giving nothing, and arranged them here in this room and locked the door, and she had lived in this house for 5 more decades with this room at the end of the back hallway, and she had never told a single soul. I sat in that room for a long time after we finished reading. My uncle left at some point. My mom went to lie down. But I stayed, sitting on the dusty floor beside the crib, holding the worn stuffed rabbit in my lap, trying to understand what kind of strength or what kind of wound it takes to carry something like that silently for an entire lifetime. The thing that undid me most was not the secret itself. It was the room. The fact that she had preserved everything so carefully. The blanket folded just so. The photographs arranged in rows. The lamp positioned so it would illumine them. She came in here, I realized, regularly, or at least sometimes. She unlocked this door and came in and sat with what she had lost, and then she locked it again and went back to making dinner and braiding my hair and driving through snowstorms, and no one ever knew. In the weeks that followed, we learned more. We hired a genealogy service, one of the good ones that specializes in adoption searches, and they found him in under a week. Thomas. He was 65 years old. He had grown up in a good family in Eugene, Oregon. He had 3 children and 4 grandchildren of his own. He was a retired high school history teacher. He was alive. I was the one who wrote the letter. My mom couldn't. She said every time she tried, she couldn't figure out how to begin. So I wrote it. I told him who we were. I told him what we had found. I told him that his mother had kept a room for him for 47 years, that she had never stopped thinking about him, that she had tried once to reach out and had respected his silence and had never blamed him for it. I told him she was gone now, and that I was sorry he would never get to know her, because she was extraordinary. He replied 3 weeks later. He said that he had received her letter in 1985. He said that he had been 37 at the time, settled in his life, and that the letter had terrified him in a way he hadn't been able to fully explain to himself. He'd told himself he would reply when he was ready, and then a year passed, and then another, and then so many years had gone by that the silence itself had become a wall he didn't know how to scale. He said not a year had gone by that he didn't think about that unanswered letter. He said he was sorry. He asked if he could see photographs of her. I sent him everything we had, every photograph from that room, and 100 more from our family albums. Grandma Ellie at Christmas, Grandma Ellie in her garden, Grandma Ellie at my college graduation, laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, completely herself. He wrote back one more time. He said she looked like someone he would have loved. I keep that letter in my dresser drawer now, and sometimes I take it out and read it, and I think about all the different kinds of love there are, the kind that speaks, the kind that waits, the kind that locks itself in a room and tends to itself in private because there is no other choice. I think about a 17-year-old girl in Burlington in 1958 holding her baby for 4 days, and I think about an 81-year-old woman in Vermont still tending to that same love 60 decades later, alone in a room at the end of a hallway with a stuffed rabbit and a yellow blanket and a lamp positioned just right. I don't think I knew her as well as I believed I did, but I think I love her more now than I ever thought possible.